Balancing combat and roleplay can sometimes be a little bit tricky for GMs, and trying to figure out that right balance is always different depending on the group that you're in. Sometimes you'll have a group that really loves combat, they really love diving into it, and maybe they aren't the most stoked to be in roleplay, or it might be vice versa. So when you're first looking at how to balance combat and roleplay in your games, think about the group that you're with first. Secondly, think about the system that you're playing with. If you're playing something like Dungeons & Dragons, it is a more combat-focused system. Yes, you can have fantastic roleplay in Dungeons & Dragons. Yes, they do have roleplay rules and mechanics, but most of the mechanics in Dungeons & Dragons, if you hold up the player's handbook and figure out what's about combat, what's about roleplay, most of it's going to be about combat. That's just how the game works, and that's fine. But then you have other games like Call of Cthulhu, which would be a lot more role-play focused, a lot more narrative focused. There is combat in Call of Cthulhu, but it's very secondary. So think about the system that you're using, and this will kind of help lead you of how much combat should I be really wanting to include in my games. The other thing you want to think about is when you have your sessions, if you have 1, 2, 3 sessions that are all just roleplay, right? There's nothing wrong with tossing some combat in there. Just vary it up, mix it up. When you do too much of one, sometimes it can get a little bit stale, a little bit rough for your players. If they're just stuck in this town and you're playing a game that has a bit more of a combat focus and everybody's just been role-playing for the last 3 sessions, they're going to be itching to draw that sword. They're going to want to do something, and they're probably going to do something a little bit silly in the game to instigate some kind of fight. So think about switching it up. You've been role-playing quite a bit lately. Think about adding a bit of spice of combat in there. The biggest thing with finding the balance is, of course, looking at your players, looking at your system, and looking at your story. What kind of story are you trying to tell? Is this the story of a civil rights movement where they're trying to uprise against the oppressors? Is this a story of adventure, of fantastical wonder as they're traveling across a landscape? Is this dungeon delving? Really think about the story that you're trying to tell, and that'll help you figure out, well, how much combat, how much roleplay do I want into this? Now, I know it sounds like I'm telling you a lot of basics, but the thing is, every single piece of advice you're going to get about TTRPGs is grounded in the basics. It's grounded in the things that we think should be obvious, but most of the time we get stuck in a complex idea and we forget about the basics that build up to create said complex idea. So, when you're thinking about balance, think about your group that you have with you. What do they like? Think about the setting and system that you're using. How is it going? Is it more combat focused or roleplay focused? Change it up every few sessions so that it's exciting, something interesting is happening. Personally, I like to do combat every 2 or 3 sessions. Especially if I'm playing something like Pathfinder 2e, which I've been playing a lot the past couple of years, I typically try to have combat every 2 or 3 sessions. And it works out well, because a lot of my stories are more narrative focused. And then, of course, think about your story in the context of what are you trying to tell, where would combat be involved, and have these organic moments where you can insert combat or insert roleplay, whichever makes more sense to you. Hopefully that helped you a little bit thinking about the balance of combat and roleplay in your TTRPG games, and let me know in the comments below if you have any questions. Bye now.